This week we are throwing it back to base fossil, although the deck we're talking about today is technically base jungle. This idea was suggested by TokArts, a long-time watcher of the channel. They reached out to me through Facebook, said, hey, here's this deck list idea I have. Now the e-card's done, I played around with it, and it's a lot of fun, and not really an idea that I had played around with much before. You know from the thumbnail that this deck is based around the Rage and Rampage attacks, which deal more damage proportionate to the number of damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. The two Pokemon we're going to be focusing on for this deck are both normal types, so they're not going to be hitting anything for weakness, but because their attacks are fully colorless, that means they can utilize DCE. Both Rampage and Rage cost 3 colorless energy, so they can start attacking on turn 2, though that's not exactly what we're going to be shooting for here. While Tauros is a basic, Dodrio is a stage 1, so it takes a little more setup, just that one extra step. But Dodrio does cover the fighting weakness that Tauros has. It also has free retreat and can reduce the retreat cost of all other Pokemon by 1. They make a pretty solid pair for what we're trying to accomplish here, which is allowing a Tauros or a Dodrio to take an attack in order to power up a Rampage or Rage attack, or just placing some damage counters on there ourselves so that we can rush in swinging. Sounds pretty risky. How exactly do we accomplish this goal? Well, let's go ahead and jump into the deck list to find out. The immediate reveal is that it is going to be accomplished mostly with Magnemite. Magnemite has this self-destruct attack for 2 energy that's going to deal 40 damage, which is pretty good, and it also does 10 damage to each Pokemon on each player's bench. So not only are you spreading damage to your opponent's side of the table, you're also spreading it on your own, which is inadvertently powering up those Rampage and Rage attacks. Now, the original deck list that TokArts sent over to me had a more expanded role for Magneton because its self-destruct deals twice as much damage, and with DCE you can pull it off on turn 3, but I did really reduce the role of Magneton in this deck just because it only has 60 HP and it's weak to fighting, so by the time you got it to turn 3, it was already gone. I was much happier just getting to turn 2 with a Magneton and self-destructing for 40 damage than trying to risk it and pull off a bigger attack the turn after, while also using up one of those critical resources for Dodrio and Tauros, which is the DCE. I didn't mention earlier, but you probably know from reading the card or just knowing what self-destruct does. For Magnemite, it's going to deal 40 damage to itself, which would normally knock out Magnemite because it only has 40 HP. And the same for Magneton. It deals 80 damage to itself, enough to knock itself out even if it has Defender attached. So on top of that 4-1 Magneton line, we're also running a 3-3 line of Dodrio and 4 copies of Tauros. I'm so happy to finally be using Tauros in a deck. That's one of the reasons I wanted to actually do a full video for this, because Tauros is one of my favorite Gen 1 Pokemon. It is an absolute beast in Pokemon Stadium, so I always thought it deserved a bit better treatment in the TCG. With 11 basics in the deck, you aren't looking at having to mulligan too many times, which is pretty nice. Moving on to the trainer base, we're going to be starting with some straight up draw power, 4 copies of Bill, and 3 copies of Professor Oak, just to help you get through your deck a lot faster, get cards into your hand, and then subsequently onto the field, just so you can get your setup as quickly as possible. Nothing too different here apart from the way that most base jungle, base fossil decks are working. It's go, go, go from the start. You want your energy attached as quickly as possible on the Pokemon that are going to be attacking or defending in the case that you are up against something like a Hitmonchan, which is one of the reasons you do want Dodrio in play as quickly as possible, because Hitmonchan was in a lot of decks and you just want that retreat boost. A couple copies of Computer Search are going to help you find those key cards when you need them, and a couple copies of Item Finder are going to let you recycle those key trainer cards from your discard whenever you need them. And most of the time it is going to be, you know, a Professor Oak, just because that is a high power card in this format, but also sometimes you really just need to deal 10 extra damage to get a KO. So in that case, it's worth it to Item Finder out just a plus power. Or one of the 4 copies we have of Gust of Wind to yank something off of the bench that you can KO this turn and take that prize card. Because damage output turn after turn is going to be the name of the game, full playset of plus power, just so that you can get those KOs that are just out of reach. On the other side of that strategy, we also have 4 copies of Defender in order to make your opponent work harder for their KOs. Normally, Magnemite's gonna knock itself out by dealing 40 damage to itself. If it's got Defender attached, it doesn't knock itself out. It forces your opponent to actually attack it in order to knock it out, instead of just getting the free prize card off of your own attack. Which kind of helps you stall for a turn, but also, like I said, it makes your opponent take an extra turn, which is another reason that I did cut more Magneton out of this deck, is I really just like that quick combo with the Magnemite. You toss down a Defender, for 2 energy you're dealing 40 damage, which is pretty decent, and then make your opponent put in the rest of the work. So on top of that, we've also got 1 copy of Revive, mostly for the Tauros, because if there's a Tauros in your discard, you can revive it to the bench and it's already got 3 damage counters on it, meaning that Rampage is already powered up significantly. As you continue to play, you get into the mid or late game, if you make it that far with this deck, you will run out of double colorless energy. There's only 4 copies, so you can burn through them pretty quick. Energy retrieval is going to be a way to get back your basic lightning energy to help cover for that fact. Now, hopefully forcing your opponent to take an extra turn, knocking out the Magnemite, hopefully buys you enough time to power up your Dodrios and Tauros without having to fully rely on double colorless energy. Those are better as just a turn of drop, so that they're not getting hit with energy removal. So the turn, you know, you move it into the active position, it shifts over to your turn, you draw a card, you can just drop that DCE from hand, and your opponent can't do anything about it until next turn if they do have the energy removal. And you're just going to be trading blows with your opponent. You're both going to be taking a lot of prize cards, but hopefully you take your last one first. So clearly this is not a top tier base set era deck, but that's not the point. You'd be surprised how many people I still get in the comments of request decks and just for fun videos being like, what? This is the worst deck list I've ever seen. There's no way Ninetales could stand up to Rain Dance. Yeah, no shit, man. That's not the point. Sometimes people just like to play card games to have fun. And it is very true to this day in the Pokemon TCG that sometimes playing the best deck is the least fun you can have. I'm looking at you, Lost Box. I'm just sitting over here bored as hell because your turn has been going for 6.5 minutes. I'll save the rest of that rant for another video. It has no place here. Instead, I would really like to thank TokArts for sending over the deck idea. I do think it's really fun. I like playtesting against a lot of other base fossil decks to see how I could really optimize what I was trying to do. And honestly, some of the most fun I had with this deck was just getting those early turn donks on just like a Squirtle, or 2-hitting a Lickitung, because with the Defender attached to Magnemite, you only deal 20 to yourself, you deal 40 to them. Their next turn, they can't knock you out because they can only deal 10 damage most of the time. And next turn, you get to blow yourself up for a second time. It's those little moments that really bring out what this deck is about and what actually makes it enjoyable to play. Super Potion is another consideration that TokArts brought up, but it does seem to distract a bit from the normal tempo of this deck. But there's also some more testing to be done with including multiple copies of Revive, maybe toss in a little bit of energy removal. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Is there a more optimized way to run this deck in your opinion? And generally, what do you think about this deck idea? Thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much to TokArts once again. If you are enjoying this vintage Pokemon TCG content, stick around to the channel. That's what we do here. Social media links are in the description, and I will see you next video.